Today's workshop is putting your garden to bed. And it's perfect time. I'm just starting to do that here up in Winlock. We've already picked all of our corn. So one of my raised beds is completed. So I'm getting ready to put it down to bed right now. Yes, thanks, Gary. Okay, the goal of putting your garden to bed is to this is our main reason. We want to make sure our garden's ready for the next season. So we want to make sure we put it to bed properly. These are the basics: planting, removing your soil, tending, pruning, and tools. And once again, this slide, I've shown this slide several times. It's all about the timing. You need to figure out what zone you're in, and then you have to know when your first killing frost is scheduled for the 23rd of October 2020 in Longview, and then the last killing frost of the year for 2021 is scheduled at 9 May 2021. And these are just estimates. Depends on your microclimate, depends on where you live, how you're protected. All kinds of things affect this frost. And when we're doing this at all, you have to plan it. You think about it for a while, and then you go ahead and do it. Just don't go out and buy the stuff and then plan to work with the stuff you have. Plan what you're going to use. So you got to know when you're going to start. What are you going to do with the produce or the produce that is left? How to winterize your garden. What to do with the remaining plants and leaves. How much work are you willing to do? How to prepare the soil for winter. And what to do with your tools. The most important thing about any kind of gardening is keeping a record. I like to know exactly when I put my tarps on, when I take my tarps off, when I plant this, when I plant that, when I start picking stuff, so I can keep an annual record of what is going on, so I know roughly when everything is coming in. And I only grow like 6 different things, so mine's kind of easy. There's a lot of people out there that grow a lot more than I do. But I like to know exactly when to plant and when things are going to come in that I need to pick. So I keep a pretty good record. Removing extended plants, and you want to mow your grass low in these fall season. So here's one of our first questions. And Gary, if you could there it is. If you can, do you want to cut the plant off at the ground level, or do you want to remove the whole plant? If you can, just click which one you feel is right. And then hit submit.
Nine people have answered. A few more and then I'm going to cut it off.
All right.
Last chance. Anybody else? Okay, Art, there you go.
All right. So what was the survey? How many people said what?
71 or 64% said cut the plant off, and 36% said remove it.
All right. Okay. Cutting the plant off. Let's see if I answered this here. Wonder where my slide disappeared. There's a slide missing off here, Gary. Something happened to it. That's all right. We'll talk about it anyhow. So if you cut the plant off at the ground level and just leave the remaining in the ground, if the plant had any kind of disease, that disease can carry over into the next growing season. So your best bet is to always remove the whole plant and put the plant into the compost pile. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, your great garden starts with great soil. I can't say enough about composting. Organic matter will improve your soil constantly. I mean, you keep adding. We've had gardeners up in this area. One of my good friends is a gardener. They've been trying to they have been improving their soil for over 8 years. They have about, it's about 20 yards of compost, and they just keep adding this and adding this to their soil structure, and their soil over years and years and years has gotten better and better and better. So finally now they hardly have any rototilling, they have hardly any weeds, and they hardly have to fertilize or do amendments very much at all because their soil is so good. Composting does great. You got to make sure if you're using organic matter, you got to make sure that the organic matter is aged and you don't plant anything immediately so you don't get any kind of pathogens carrying up into your crops. If you use organic matter, that reduces your fertilizer amounts. It also enhances your microbial activity and suppresses pathogens from getting in there. It also accelerates the breakdown of pesticides and other synthetic compounds. So that's the goal, is trying to make your soil work instead of you having to add additives to that soil.
All right, I've got a question for you from the chat box. It says, it makes sense, but it's too hard to pull all those things out. What about just removing the disease stuff and leaving the rest in the ground to break down and be organic material?
Yes, you can do that as long as you know the plant is not diseased. You can just leave it. A lot of times I'll just tear my up. I actually when I pull my tomato plants, I pull my tomato plants out. Sometimes if they're a good condition of the plant, I'll just lay that plant right on top of my bed and let it rot right there. Okay, so manure must be well composted and must be vegetarian. Do not use manure that is produced by meat eaters. That's where you get a lot of pathogens from. Cover crops are great. They help you out with weed suppression, erosion control. They're also nitrogen fixers. They break up the hard pan. Here's just a few that is used: red clover, annual ryegrass, fava beans. There's a very complete list at Territorial Seeds. Just go online and go into territorialseeds.com and punch in cover crops, and it'll tell you all kinds of cover crops to use. Liming produces calcium over the long term and neutralizes acidic soils. I lime once a year, and we'll talk about exactly when I do at the end of this lesson. This is the second survey question.
Okay, I'll bring that up. Another question, is rabbit manure the best?
Rabbit manure works great. You can rabbit manure, alpaca manure, and I want to say deer manure are the ones that you can use immediately in the garden, and you don't have pathogen carryover. You can put that in hot, and it won't burn your plants, and it's safer. I still would recommend waiting 6 6 months to 3/4 of a year before I eat anything with manure in it, though, if it was fresh. But rabbit manure is very good and very mild. Okay, so the second survey question, do you want to add fertilizer to your garden beds after teardown? Yes or no?
Okay, we got 5 of you have answered. 9, 10. Okay, 5 seconds. Okay, Art, what you got was 73% said no and 27% said yes. So most people thought no.
Outstanding. No's the correct answer. All right, this is why right here. When you fertilize your garden, the plants aren't going to use that much fertilizer right now. So yeah, you want to keep away from the fertilizer. Now, if you're doing a winter garden, you might want to add fertilizer. If you have lawns will take fertilization, and you want to do that right around, I think it's in November, right around the Thanksgiving time frame. And you use a winter fertilizer for your lawn. But for most garden uses, excessive nutrients will not be utilized, and it could leach into your water tables. Plants only take fertilization at their peak growing cycle. So that's very good on the question on that one.
Another question for you.
Sure.
Can, on the green manure, do you have to turn it over in the spring? Can you just cut it out and put it on the compost pile for later? Will the nitrogen fixing part of the fava beans still enrich the soil?
What the majority of the people do with your cover crops, your green manure, is a lot of people will just cut the height of it down, leave it on your garden, and a lot of people will rototill that right into the garden. And that'll all break down, and that'll just enhance your garden immensely. You can take it off if you want to, or leave it on there. Either way you want to go will not hurt one way or the other. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I would also say make sure it doesn't go to seed, because if it goes to seed, you're going to have a mess.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, you want to make sure your cover crop does not go to seed. You're going to have more cover crop than you'll ever want to know to do with. So, yeah, make sure it does not go to seed. Thanks, Gary.
Welcome.
Okay. Everybody when they were a kid loved to jump in the leaves. Well, here's what we're going to do with our leaves this year. So once you get your beds tore down and everything removed, what I usually do is I'll lime the bed, and then I'll cover the bed with all my leaves. And the way I do this is I have what they call a cyclone rake I put behind my lawnmower, my riding lawnmower, and it mulches all my leaves up and breaks it all down and chops it up real nice and fine, and I'll lay that right on top of my bed. And I just let that sit there all year long. And I'll also cover it with the next picture over here on the right-hand side. I cover my beds with tarps. These are not my beds. I have raised beds. But basically, this is what I do. I cover them with a tarp, and I let them sit all winter long. The lower picture is your cover crops. And those are in raised beds. They look nice and green, and they'll stay nice and green. And when they're at a certain height and before they go to seed, you cut them down and turn them in.
Another question for you since you're talking about cover crops, it works great. Question is, what is the easiest cover crop for the absolute beginner and when to plant?
I usually, if I'm going to use a cover crop, I'll put annual rye as a good one. These are the commonly used one, the annual rye, the buckwheat, and the crimson clover. I like the annual rye. And I plant that usually right after my garden bed is after I have everything removed and ready to go and cleaned up and everything put away. Then I put my cover crop in and I let it go. And if you go onto Territorial Seeds, they have a free magazine or a free catalog they'll send to you to the house. And I don't just get it for the crops alone or for the seeds or anything like that. I use that magazine, that catalog, and it has growing tips all through that whole catalog. It's one of the better seed catalogs around. And if you order it online, they'll send it to you for free. It's a great catalog. Okay, then we're going to get into pruning. We're not going to talk much about it because that's going to be a later topic, but when I prune, like my fruit trees and everything like that, they all get pruned in the usually January, February time frame. I prune back my roses in the November time frame. I get them low so they don't break. I do my butterfly bushes, lilacs. You have to know when to prune the bushes. So I always look everything up because I can't remember everything we have. So this is one of the good books I found, this Pruning and Training. And it's by the American Horticulture Society. And it'll tell you exactly when to prune what and when. Okay, tool sharpening and stowage. September 15th at noon is how to sharpen tools. But we're going to discuss a little bit of stuff here, but not very much. So once you're all finished with your gardening, then you want to take care of your tools for next year. So water hoses. Water hoses, I want to make sure I drain and store. So if any hoses are down into my garden, I disconnect them all. I drain them all out and I roll them all up and put them away. Water lines. Okay, my place here, my water lines is a secondary, my garden has secondary lines coming off my pump. I can literally shut off my whole circuit down to my garden. So what I do is I shut down my water going down to my garden, I drain it down, and everything I have down there is frost-free valves. They're hydrants, so they drain right to the ground, so you have a little chance of freezing. But I make sure everything's blown out anyhow and cleared out. My irrigation systems. I use drip irrigation on just about everything in my garden. I have soaker hoses on my corn. I have drip irrigation on my tomatoes and peppers. I have a sprinkler system set up for my green beans, and that's all I've got in there right now that's left. So what I'm going to end up doing is I've shut it all down for my corn so I can start taking out all my soaker hoses, rolling it up and putting it away. Next will be my green beans. I'll break down my teepees and all that stuff and get the plants out of there, and I'll take all the sprinklers from them. And then my last probably will be the tomatoes and the peppers. And I'll break all those drip irrigation systems down and store them and put them away. And my manifold is shaped like a horseshoe, and they're 25 feet on the three sides of the horseshoe. So 25 feet, 25 feet, 25 feet, so it's 75 feet total. And I make my lengths of my beds all the same, so I can shift my irrigation system from one leg of the horseshoe to the other leg of the horseshoe. So I can rotate my crops, and I don't have to worry about my lines being too short or anything. They're always the same size for all three of the beds. Lawnmowers. Lawnmowers, you want to sharpen your blades. You want to scrape away all the built-up grass underneath the decks. Grease the bearings, change the oil. and do a basic cleanup on the whole mower. Get it all ready and put it away for the wintertime. That way you don't have to rush and do it in the summer. Loppers. What I do with my loppers is I'll sharpen them, and then I'll lubricate them, and I'll put a coating of WD-40 on the blades after I'm done with them. And I'll even go one step further. I might even soak a paper towel with WD-40 and wrap it around the blades themselves on my loppers. Same with pruners. I do the same thing. Chainsaws, sharpen your blades up, lubricate them, clean them up, and store them. Your cages, trellising devices, after everything's off of them, remove them and put them away and store them. So that part there, after I put everything away, my garden's just about basically finished. So I said I'd tell you how I put my garden to bed, and we'll go step by step through this and everything I do to take care of the garden. So my first step is I remove all my garden vegetables. So I pull everything out. I pull the roots out, and I pull the whole plant out, and I put that into my compost pile. After I have all that onto my compost pile, what do I need to do? Because that's all green. I have to turn my compost pile. So my compost bins, I've got 3 compost bins. I have one that I use all the time for the garden that I use in September, October timeframe. That is finished compost. Then my next bin over is the one that I use that I'm building and turning all summer long and adding to. And then my third bin is usually I just have soil in there that I have mixed with compost. So this one will go into the bin that is for the next year. So I put all that garden vegetables in the bin for the compost bin for the next year, and I'll get my bins are wide enough. I made them 6 foot wide. So I have a front loader on my tractor, and I can just take my front loader of my tractor and pull it in there and turn each bin. And that just churns up my compost and gets it cooking and I do this about 2 to 3 times a week. Then I'll take my tractor out there and turn it. It's a lot easier than using pitchforks and everything else and compost turners and spinning the drums and all that stuff. I like using the tractor. It makes it so much easier on me. I store all my cages. I take down my bird netting off my blueberries, and I put my teepees away. So for my cages, I've got the round cages for my tomatoes. They're 52 inches tall. So I take my tomatoes out, I pull the cages off, and I'll stack the cage on top of each other. And I get them, I only grow 10 tomato plants this year. I used to do 18 to 20, and it just got too many. I was having enough tomatoes for my whole neighbors, for all my neighbors. So I just cut down to 10 tomato plants, and that's still too much. I still pass out tomatoes, but I just stack my cages on top of each other. The bird netting, I take the bird netting. I've got 5 blueberry plants. This year was the first year I put bird netting on them and covered them. And I had over 45 pounds of blueberries out of 5 plants. So what I did was I just put pieces of PVC in the ground, and then I put PVC piping into the PVC that was in the ground, and I ran the pole all the way up. And then I put elbows on everything and went around, made a square around the plant, basically, a box. And I just put the netting over each plant. And that worked great. So I'll take that all down and put it away for winter. My teepees I just made out of, they're wooden poles. And I just made like a pyramid, a teepee. And I have 2 poles per side. I have a bolt at the top of them. I separate the bottom and spread it. And then I put, there's a total of 4 poles per teepee. So 2 and 2, and I just stagger each pole over each other. So that's how I make my teepees. And I have 2 teepees going this year. And that was a lot of green beans. I'm still harvesting green beans. So I'll tear all those down. I'll pull the green beans out and I'll pull the poles out of the ground. I tape the bottom of the poles so they don't rot. I just use an electrical tape and I wrap the bottoms, and whatever's in the ground is taped. So it lets my poles last a lot longer. And so I just pull the poles out of the ground and slide them on top of each other and store them. I've got a manifold that goes on top of my horseshoe, and it runs, I have it in 4 sections. I have water valves on 4 sections. One section goes to my tomatoes and peppers. One goes down my green bean row or whatever else is planted in there, squash, watermelons, whatever I want to grow there. And then my other one goes to my corn row. So all I have to do is disconnect the drip irrigation system or soaker hoses that go to this stuff, and I drain them all down, roll them up, put them away, and I'll break down my whole manifold and put that whole manifold away for the winter. This is when I also lime my beds. So right after my tear down, everything's cleaned up and everything's put away. Then I'll take and I'll lime my raised beds. And then I add my compost. So I put my compost over top. And then by this time, I'm usually picking up leaves and all that other stuff. So I take out my lawn tractors and I'll cut over the leaves and I'll pick them up I have a cyclone rake, like I said. It picks them up into a big bag, and I just run it down to my raised beds and I'll dump it right on top of my beds. And I'll spread it out so it's nice and flat. I put usually about 4 inches of this cut grass and leaves on top. And then last thing I do is I tarp my beds and keep them covered until spring prior to planting. And you'd be surprised what this bed's going to look like after doing this. I was shocked. I've done this 3 years in a row, and it's just phenomenal what my beds are like. So like I said, I have frost-free hydrants down there. I have 4 frost-free hydrants, 2 on the corners of my garden beds, 1 going to my one garage down there, and 1 that goes to a wall that I haven't figured out what I'm going to plant there yet. But I turn that water off on top of right coming out of my main line, and I open up my drain valve at the bottom, and I'll drain it down. And I also have a cap on one of the pipes that I can run an air hose right to and blow it out if I have to, if I want to. But it usually drains pretty clear or pretty free. But one thing I will do, because I have water running into the greenhouse, my greenhouse sits right in the center of my horseshoe, so it makes it very convenient. I have a 5-foot walk around the whole perimeter of my greenhouse, and then my horseshoe just fits right in there for my raised beds. But what I'll do is I'll take I have a little tank that I fill up with air, and I'll just blow out my line to my greenhouse so there's no water in that my greenhouse line so it doesn't freeze. And then I can do this all winter long if I have to. I can sharpen all my tools, conduct maintenance on all my equipment, my rototiller, all my yard machinery, my chainsaws, my chipper, and my tractor. And I just take my time. I have a garage down by my garden area, and I got a fireplace in there, so I just throw some logs on the fire in there, and I'll bring in a piece of equipment each day, and I'll work on it and get it done, and I'll put the piece of equipment back. And it usually takes me about a month, but I just take my time on it and just do a real good job, and it's all ready for the next year. So in summary, we showed you basically how to plan, how to remove, what to do about your soil, tending, pruning, and what to do with your tools.